The cameras were still rolling when a man named Klaus Brener, a 46-year-old marketing director from Hamburg, Germany, leaned into the microphone on the Family Feud stage and told Steve Harvey, in front of 300 people and a live studio, that America was, in his words, a loud, embarrassing joke of a country. The audience went completely still. One of the floor producers physically covered her face. Steve Harvey did not move. He did not blink. He did not reach for the microphone stand. He stood absolutely still for 5 seconds, and then he said something so quiet and so specific and so measured that Klaus Brener stopped talking mid-breath. And when Steve finished speaking, Klaus Brener sat down on the edge of the stage platform, not at the podium, not in a chair, just the edge, and he did not say another word for 23 minutes. Steve would later call that afternoon the moment he was proudest of in 31 years of television. Not for winning an argument, for not having one. It was a Friday afternoon in July 2019, and Klaus Brener had not come to the Family Feud studio looking for a confrontation. He had come as part of an American vacation, 2 weeks with his wife, Ingrid, and their twin sons, Tobias and Felix, 14. The family had booked the studio experience as a tourist activity. The kind of afternoon where you sit in the audience and watch a taping and maybe get pulled on stage for a brief game segment. They had landed in Atlanta 3 days earlier. Klaus had been unimpressed. He was the kind of man who narrated his opinions as facts, and who had spent 22 years in marketing becoming expert at the particular confidence that comes from always being the smartest person in whatever room he believed he was standing in. He spoke perfect English. He had opinions about America that he had formed carefully over years of European news consumption, and he delivered them with the easy authority of someone who had never had to examine whether he had actually earned the expertise he claimed. He had made 2 comments in the audience before he was pulled on stage, remarks his wife had touched his arm about, quietly, twice. He had not read the touch. When the producer pulled him on stage for the audience participation segment, he had gone willingly. He was charismatic in the way that certain kinds of confident men are charismatic, loud and immediate and sure of his own effect. The studio audience had laughed twice at things he said. He had taken that as confirmation. And then Steve Harvey, as he always does with audience participants, asked him a warm-up question. He said, "So you've come all the way from Germany. What do you think of America so far?" And Klaus Brener leaned into the microphone and said what he said. The room went quiet in a way it hadn't all episode, not the usual game show pause, a different kind of silence entirely. Several people in the 3rd row shifted in their seats at exactly the same moment. A sound technician pulled off one ear of his headphones. Steve Harvey did not move. His face did not change. He stood with his cards at his side, and he waited until Klaus Brener had finished speaking, which took approximately 14 more seconds, during which Klaus elaborated with several supporting examples that he seemed to have prepared. And he did not stop talking until he realized, gradually, that the complete absence of reaction from Steve Harvey was more powerful than any response could have been. Steve waited 1 more second after Klaus finished. Then he said, "Okay, can I ask you something?" Klaus said yes. Steve said, "How many countries have you lived in?" Klaus said Germany and briefly England for graduate school. Steve nodded. He said, "How many years total?" Klaus said approximately 3. Steve said, "I've lived in a lot of places in America, not by choice at first. I lived in Cleveland, I lived in Memphis, I lived in my car. 1985 to 1988, 3 years, 1 Ford Tempo, gas station bathrooms, food from dumpsters behind restaurants. And from that car, I had a very specific view of America." He paused. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't proud. It was embarrassing, actually, being that broke in a country with that much. He said the next part slowly. But I'll tell you what I also saw from that car. I saw a black man get out of a Cadillac at 2 in the morning and hand me $200 for no reason other than that he could see I needed it. I saw a gas station attendant who didn't have to notice me. I saw a woman at a truck stop counter give me a full meal and not charge me, and not look at me differently, and not say a word about it. Steve looked at Klaus. I saw a country that can be a mess and still have people in it who do that. That's not a joke. A joke has a punchline. What I'm describing doesn't have one. The studio fell completely silent. Klaus Brener had stopped processing around the part about the Ford Tempo. He was a man who had arrived at the stage with a conclusion already written and had not anticipated being asked to reconsider the methodology. He was looking at Steve Harvey the way a person looks at something they have suddenly realized they did not understand as well as they thought they did. But Steve wasn't done. He held up his hand and turned to face the audience. He said, "I want to say something to everybody in this room. I have done this show for a long time. And in all those years, the thing that keeps me going, the thing that keeps every single family that walks through those doors going, is the belief that something good is possible. That the number on the board can be the number you need. That the person you love might get to come home. That tomorrow might be different from today." He turned back to Klaus. "That belief, some people call it naive, some people call it foolish, some people call it American." He paused. "I call it the only way to stay alive when things are as bad as they get, and I'm not going to apologize for it." Klaus opened his mouth. He closed it. He sat down on the edge of the stage platform. There was a long pause, and then Klaus said something that nobody in the room expected. He said, "My father came to Germany from Turkey in 1971 with nothing. He worked for 30 years. He never complained. I have never understood until right now how much that cost him." His voice was different. The marketing director confidence was gone. Something quieter had taken its place. "I owe him an apology." "Not you, him." Steve Harvey looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "Go call him." Klaus said his father had died in 2015. Steve said, "Then tell your sons." Another silence. Then Steve smiled, not the television smile, but the real one. He said, "Okay, you came here to play a game. Let's play a game." And they did. And nobody in the studio had trouble laughing for the rest of the afternoon. Both families received their prizes. The Ose family from Atlanta, who had been the competing family in the audience segment, received an additional studio gift package. Steve did not call Klaus out again or revisit what had been said. He treated him with complete normality for the rest of the taping, which was its own form of generosity. After the taping, Klaus Brener found Steve Harvey near the production exit. He shook his hand and said, "I was wrong about what I said. Not about America specifically, about the way I said it. The certainty. The way I said it." Steve nodded and said, "That's all I needed." Klaus said, "How did you know what to say?" Steve said, "I didn't. I just knew what not to say." When the footage was released 8 weeks later, the clip of Steve's response to Klaus had been shared over 280 million times. The hashtag "Not a Joke" trended in 37 countries, including Germany. German newspapers ran op-eds. An American studies professor at the University of Hamburg used the clip as a teaching tool in her next semester's course on American identity and immigrant experience. The Daily Show, the BBC, and CNN International all referenced the exchange within 72 hours of the clip going public. 3 months after the taping, Klaus Brener published a personal essay in a German cultural magazine about the afternoon. The essay, titled simply Atlanta, described the experience of having a belief dismantled by a story you didn't see coming. It became one of the most shared pieces of European writing about America that year. Klaus sent a copy to the show's producers. He included a note. The note said, "Please tell him that my sons heard it differently after that day." A year after the taping, Steve Harvey established the Tempo Fund, named for the Ford Tempo he had lived in for 3 years, a small grants program for performers and creatives who were experiencing homelessness or housing instability. The fund operated quietly, without fanfare, which was Steve's specific request. The motto he chose for it was 7 words: "Something good is still possible from here." Today, Klaus Brener has a framed print in his Hamburg office. It is a quote attributed to no one in particular, just words printed in clean type on white paper. The quote is, "A joke has a punchline. What I'm describing doesn't have one." His sons, Tobias and Felix, are now 17. Klaus told them the story of that afternoon the following summer, at the dinner table, unprompted. They listened without interrupting. When he finished, Tobias said, "Why did it take you that long to call Grandpa's name a compliment?" Klaus had no answer for that. He is still thinking about one. Pride has a particular shape when it hardens. It stops being a quality and starts being a wall. And walls are comfortable until the moment someone shows you that the view from the other side is the one you needed. Steve Harvey did not knock Klaus Brener's wall down. He simply stood on his side of it and told the truth about what his own view had looked like. And Klaus Brener discovered, on his own, that the view he had been protecting was smaller than he had thought. If this moment, and Steve's extraordinary calm, moved you, subscribe and hit the thumbs up. Share this with someone who needs to see what grace under pressure actually looks like. Have you ever had a belief challenged in a way that changed something in you? Let us know in the comments, and ring that notification bell for more moments that remind us who we can be when we choose our better instincts.